Today, we're talking about working with DNA matches, beginning to sort your matches. And so, this is really for a more beginner. Of course, anyone can get things out of this, but we're going to start kind of at the very beginning and we're going to just talk about autosomal DNA testing for a minute. You can get autosomal DNA testing for genealogy purposes from four major DNA companies, and that would be AncestryDNA, MyHeritage DNA, 23andMe, and Family Tree DNA. Now, Family Tree DNA does offer multiple tests that you can purchase from them, but the Family Finder test from them is the autosomal test. But the other companies only offer autosomal testing. So if you have done those testing, companies, that is the type of testing that you have done. So you might say, what is autosomal DNA? Well, basically, it is found on the 22 pair of chromosomes known as autosomes that we have in the nucleus of every cell in our body. Autosomal DNA test looks at those 22 chromosomes and the autosomes on there. We get one chromosome in each pair from the father and one from our mother. So this comes out to 50% of our autosomal DNA comes from our father and 50% comes from our mother. Or shown a different way on this chart, you can see that males and females can take the autosomal DNA test. It makes no difference. We all have autosomal DNA, no matter our biological sex at birth. And again, like I said, we get 50% of our autosomal DNA from our father and 50% from our mother. And it is an exact split between the two. Each generation that you go back further on your tree, you can take that number and go in half. So if we get 50% of our DNA from each parent, then we get 25% of our DNA from each of our four grandparents. And that number is not exact. So starting with the grandparents, you're getting approximately 25% from each grandparent, but it could be a little bit more, it could be a little bit less, but it's around 25%. You can take that number in half again and look at your great-grandparents and say that you got approximately 12.5% of your DNA from each of your 8 great-grandparents. And if you wanted to go back to the next generation, the second great-grandparents, it would be about 6.25% from each of those, and so forth and so on. So you can do that math. Now, you're going to have measurable autosomal DNA from around your 5th great-grandparents, 5th or 6th great-grandparents, and closer. So starting around the 6th, 7th great-grandparents, you will have a little bit of DNA that you did inherit from those people, but it will be in such a small amount of DNA that it really won't be measurable on this test. So that makes the autosomal DNA test useful for looking at family tree questions that you might have regarding perhaps your 5th great-grandparents and closer, but really farther out than that, it's not as useful for that type of information. When you get your autosomal DNA test results back from the testing company, you will have 2 kinds of results: the ethnicity estimate, which we are not talking about today, and a list of DNA matches. And these are basically genetic cousins of yours. And you could be closely related to them, or you could be distantly related to them. And the DNA company gives you an estimate of the closeness of that relationship. And we are talking about your DNA matches today. So that is what we are talking about as the topic of this program. How can you use autosomal DNA results in your genealogical research? Well, these are just a couple of ideas. You can verify your genealogical family tree through finding DNA matches that are descended from known ancestors. You can connect with distant relatives that you find on your DNA match list to share information, and you can research genetic mysteries together with those matches. You can also help out adopted persons who might be on your DNA match list to help them find their birth family. And we're not really going to cover that topic in this presentation, but it is possible. This is my genealogical tree. So by that, I mean that these are people that I either knew in person, or I was told were my relatives, or I found genealogical records such as birth records, death records, marriage records, census records, and so forth that show that these people are my ancestors, the parents of my grandparents or the grandparents of my grandparents, and so forth. Your genealogical tree can be different from your DNA tree, meaning that some of these people could be not biologically related to me once I start investigating my DNA, because perhaps maybe there was an unknown adoption in my family. And let's say, and this is purely hypothetical for this program, but let's just say that Joseph Caesar there in the middle, let's say I found out that he was adopted or taken in by another family, and he's not biologically related to parents John Caesar and Helen Poklukar over in Slovenia. So if that were the case, then my DNA tree would have to show who his birth family was on the tree. So that is a way that your genealogical tree can differ from your DNA tree. But let's just say that we are trying to prove some of these relationships by DNA. One way that autosomal DNA can help you is by providing you with matches who are descended from your ancestors. So I have drawn a red box around George Brown and Sara Kennedy over here on the top right-hand side of my tree. You can see that they are my dad's great-grandparents and my second great-grandparents, according to this tree. Now, on my autosomal DNA match list, it turns out that I have several DNA matches that are descended from this couple. You can see here that at the top we have George and Sara Kennedy, and we have my descendancy through them is through their daughter Alice Brown, and you can see me down at the bottom of the screen there. She's my great-grandmother. And you can see that over to the right, James Presley Brown and Fred Brown are two brothers of Alice. And I have two DNA matches to descendants of Fred Brown and one DNA match to a descendant of James Presley Brown. And then if we go over to the left of Alice, you can see that Albert Brown is another brother of Alice's. And I have one DNA match to a descendant of Albert. Now, Alice did have some other siblings. She had Estella, Ida Mae, and Harvey. And so far, I don't have any DNA matches to descendants of those children yet. But what these DNA matches are telling me is that my genealogical tree that showed that George and Sara are my ancestors, that they really are the parents of Alice Brown, is probably correct, because I'm showing DNA matches to other people that are descended from that same couple. So in this case, I think the DNA is certainly bolstering my tree and confirming that my genealogical research is on the right track as far as this particular branch of my family goes. So basically, those descendants of George and Sadie who are on my match list, just to recap, they do descend from the same ancestor couple as I do, George and Sadie. And the reason that they're on my DNA match list is because we share DNA between us, me and those other matches. And that DNA was passed down to us from George and Sadie, both of us. And I, of course, inherited it through my dad. And the matches got it from their parents as well, but it's passed down. It's basically segments of DNA from George and Sadie. I hope that gives you some ideas of how you could use your DNA matches to help verify your tree and to just help you in your genealogy in general. Let's get started with kind of sorting and working with your DNA matches so you can make discoveries like that with your own DNA. I think some beginner steps for starting to work with your DNA matches is to just familiarize yourself with the DNA matches page at the testing company website and familiarize yourself with your individual match page. Learn about estimated relationships, identify known matches, and sort matches into groups. Those are some of the eventual steps that we'll want to go on. Let's talk about AncestryDNA first. This is the testing company that many of you have used. We will cover the other testing companies, at least briefly, but we will spend more time on AncestryDNA. First of all, let's familiarize yourself with your DNA matches page. So this is what my DNA match page looks like at AncestryDNA. And so you just want to familiarize yourself with this, figuring out what each of these buttons do, clicking on different things. And I would say I see more and more people that are wanting to look at their DNA on their phone, and that's fine, but it's not going to work necessarily the same way on a phone as it would on a desktop or a laptop. And so you might find that the site works better, more smoothly, and without as many glitches if you do use it from a desktop or a laptop. So if you're having trouble doing this on your phone, I would say switch to an actual desktop or laptop. It should make a lot of difference. So these screenshots are basically from a desktop. So I would say click on all of these different buttons and see what they do. You can see that across the top there are filters. Click on those and see what they do. Click on the search button and see what that does, and the sort button. Now, each of the companies is laid out fairly similarly, where you have your matches are sorted in the order of closest match first. So at the top of your DNA match page should be the person who is most closely related to you, who has taken a DNA test with that company. And then at the very bottom, if you were to scroll down, and I believe at Ancestry, I have something like 50,000 matches. It may even be more than that. So if I got down to the end of that list, the last match on that list, that person would be the person that I share the least amount of DNA with. So probably the least related to me of the whole entire list. So your list is sorted that way, and you can resort it in different ways over on the sort button on the right-hand side. But generally speaking, you're going to have the name of your match, you're going to have the estimated relationship, and you're going to have family tree of the match. Also, you can click on and view the match over there on the side. So I have covered up the names of these matches because I don't have their permission to show their real names. So I am trying to refer to them by initials. So my top match here is MJ, you can see, and she's female. That's what the pink outline next to her name means. If it were a male, it would be a blue outline. And the estimated relationship is close family to first cousin. It tells me how many centimorgans of DNA I share with her. And over on the family tree of the match column, it tells me if she has a family tree, how many people are in that family tree, and if there's a common ancestor hint. And we will talk more about that in a minute. Estimated relationships. Now, this is an important thing, and I just did a whole program on this. So you can find this on the library's YouTube channel about the relationships that the DNA companies give you for your different matches. So this is a match with NG, and you can see that it says we're first to second cousins, and we share 369 centimorgans. At Ancestry, if I click on that 369 centimorgans, you can see it's blue, which means it is a clickable link. If I click on that, it opens up this little window below, which you can see that shows the possible DNA relationships for somebody who shares 369 centimorgans with you. And so it gives us a number of possibilities. It says 77% of the time, a person sharing this much DNA is a first cousin once removed, a half first cousin, a second great grandparent, a second great grandchild, and there's some more that you could click on there. 22% of the time, it would be a second cousin, first cousin twice removed, half first cousin once removed, and so forth. So you can see there's at least 10 different relationships that this person NG could be with me. And this is not telling us which one it is. So it really is something that we are going to have to investigate further. The DNA company can't tell us what that relationship is. They can just give us some guidance on what possibilities might be. So, as I said, they do not know exactly how you are related to your matches. They estimate your relationship based on how much DNA you actually share with a person, and that DNA is measured in centimorgans at all of the companies except 23andMe, and they measure it in percentages. Most companies will allow you to see how they came up with that estimated relationship, and that was what I just showed you at Ancestry. Now, some other tools that you can use to help you visualize what the relationship might be include the Shared Centimorgan Project at DNApainter.com and the DNA Detective's Green Relationship Chart. This chart is showing you the most likely relationships and includes about 95% of the possibilities. So it does not include all of the possibilities, but only the 95% that are most probable. And a lot of people find the DNA Detectives chart to be outdated. I still like to use it. But if you're really in doubt, you'll want to check the Shared Centimorgan Project because it is up to date. And that is at DNApainter.com. This is what that tool looks like. And this is a free site. So you can go to DNApainter.com and just hit on Tools and then Shared Centimorgan Project, and it should come right up. This is where you would put in this middle box here, you would put in the total number of centimorgans or the percentage of DNA that you share with a match, and it will give you a list of probable relationships, possible and probable relationships. This is the green chart I was telling you about. It's also helpful, I find. Okay, now, you also want to know how to view your match page with an individual at each testing company. So at Ancestry, let's say I want to see my match with NG. So I'm going to click on View Match, or I could click on NG's name over on the left. Either way will take me to the individual match page between me and NG, which looks like this. Now at the top, you can see, in case I get confused about what page I'm on, I can clearly see that I am looking at the match between me and NG. And so that's important. It also shows us again the number of centimorgans that we have in common. There's a button for messaging this person. So this is where I would contact NG if I wanted to. There's also these tabs here. There's a tree tab, an ethnicity tab. This is where I could see NG's ethnicity estimate and shared matches, which we will talk about in a minute. With the tree here, you can see that it's not a very big tree, but it does have a number of names on it that I could research if I wanted to go further and try to expand the tree. I probably could. So how do you identify your matches? Today, we're just going to focus on really easy steps for identifying your matches. So this is going to be for people who already know their family tree, already know some of your relatives, maybe have had family reunions and such where you have met a lot of extended relatives, or you've exchanged Christmas cards or greeting cards with different extended relatives, or you've heard your elders, your mom, your dad, your aunts and uncles, your grandparents talking about their relatives. And so one easy way to identify your matches is looking at their name, their username that they're using on the website and saying, oh, yeah, I recognize that name. That's cousin Bobby. Or maybe you just recognize the last name and you say, oh, wait a minute. I think somebody with that last name married into the family, and so forth and so on. So sometimes you can just recognize their name and you will know who it is. Another easy step to identify matches is to look at their tree. So you can look at the tree, you can look at the linked trees and the unlinked trees and compare the surnames to your tree. Do you see surnames in common? Do you see places in common? Do you see an actual common ancestor in their tree or a common ancestor hint? And if their tree looks especially intriguing, or if they're a pretty close match, you'll want to do a little research on them yourself. If their tree has 3 names on it, you can probably expand that to figure out more names on their tree and just do some more research to try to figure out who this match might be. So you want to systematically work through your match list. I would say you go down your match list from your closest matches down to the 3rd to 4th cousins, at least at this first step. And for now, I would skip over those that have no tree or they have a private tree and you don't recognize their name. Skip over those whose trees do not contain names that you recognize. We will come back to those matches at a later time. But today we're really doing easy matches. After you make an identification of a match, you want to make notes about the connection for your own reference. Each of the DNA companies allows you to add notes to the match page. The match may take down his or her tree at a later time, or you may forget how you identified this person. I've had that happen. I tracked down who a match was several years ago. I didn't make any notes about it. And now I stare at the match and I think, I have a niggling suspicion that I know who this person is, but I didn't write down all of the steps that I took to identify them. And now I don't remember who it is. And so I have to go through all those steps again a second time. So don't do what I did. Learn from my mistakes, that you should just keep really good notes the first time so you don't have to redouble your work. Now at AncestryDNA and MyHeritage, you can create a group to put the matches in. And I would make a group for the common ancestor couple that you share with that match. So remember the people that we talked about at the very beginning of this program when I was showing you George Brown and Sadie Kennedy, my second great grandparents, and I showed you 4 matches that I had that descended from them. So those, I would create a group and I would call it George Brown / Sadie Kennedy. And I would add those 4 matches that I had identified to that group, because this is going to be the group for the descendants of that couple. So that's how I organize my groups of matches. To show you another example of how to do that with Ancestry, let's look at DP for a minute. So DP is a match, and we're going to click View Match. And when I look at the match with DP, I recognize his name. And I don't necessarily recognize his first name, but I recognize his last name as Porter. I know that my mom had a cousin who married a Porter, and I think to myself, this is probably him. And so I asked my mom about it as well, and she confirms, yes, this is a known cousin of hers. So I'm going to view the match with DP. So here's me and DP on the match page. And you can see that DP has a small tree, and at the bottom there of his tree, he has the same people in his tree that I have in mine: Jason, Abel Willison, and Jesse Lepper. They are also over on the side there where it says common ancestors. So this is telling us that based on our trees, and that's what all that verbiage there is saying, according to Ancestry member trees, these are the common ancestors that connect you and DP. So it's saying that Jason Willison and Jesse Lepper are the common ancestors between us. And I believe that to be true based on what my mother told me. So if I click on view the relationship between me and Jason Willison or me and Jesse Lepper, it's going to show me how DP is related to them and how I am related to them. So this is showing us Jason Willison going down to Helen, my grandmother, to my mother, to me on the left. And then DP comes down through a sister of Helen, Betsy, to DP's mother, to DP. And because I know that this is true, because we're personally acquainted with DP, I'm not going to do more research to kind of like backtrack DP's tree. But you certainly could do that if you had never heard of the person and you want to try to verify it yourself. So those tree hints, like I said, they can sometimes be incorrect. I'm accepting that this tree hint is correct because I personally know of DP and I know that he is related to me in that way. Ancestry and MyHeritage are both going to give you those hints on your DNA match page, and you can use them as some good information that you might try to verify it if possible, especially if you think it looks shaky, but often these can be correct, especially the more recent ones. Now, like I said, you do want to make notes about your connection. So once you have determined who the match is, in this case DP, I'm going to make some notes about it, and then I'm going to add him to a match group descended from that ancestor couple. So in this case here, we're back on the match page between me and DP. You can see up at the top, there's add to group. This is where we're going to create a group and then add DP to the group. So create custom group, and then it asks you to name the group. So I am naming the group the names of our common ancestors, which is Jason Willison and Jesse Lepper. I'm assigning a color and I'm saving it. I'm going to add to group again, and then click on that group down here where the little blue check mark is and add DP to the group for Jason Willison and Jesse Lepper. So this is going to be a group for cousins that I am connected with, where Jason and Jesse are the common ancestor couple. And then you can see this other red arrow here is showing us the note. This is where you add the note. So this is where I would add, and I typed in a very long note here that basically, as if I'm not going to remember this at all, I spelled everything out. I wrote down that DP is using his initials, but it stands for Dan Porter. His mother is Cecily Porter. Cecily's mother is Aunt Betsy Willison. Betsy was the daughter of Jason and Jesse. So DP is my second cousin on the maternal side. And I'm using fake names for this. These are not the people's real names. And then I would save this note. Then this is going to be saved on this match between me and DP, and I can go back and refer to it at any point. And you can see once I added DP to that group, you can see way over on the right-hand side here, he has a little colored dot there. That is the colored dot for the group that we put him in, Jason Willison and Jesse Lepper. And if I hovered over that dot, it would tell me what the name of the group was. Let's do another one real quick here. This is RL. I'm going to click on get into the match there. And RL has an unlinked tree. And so I'm going to investigate the unlinked tree. I can see that way over, I'm looking at all these names on this tree. She has a nice tree. and I see the name Bursby, James Bursby and Mary White, and I recognize them. They also live in Sumner County, Tennessee, which I also recognize as a place where a lot of my ancestors lived. So this is how I'm actually related to RL. My third great-grandparents, James White and Tacy Smith, I'm descended from their daughter, Lucinda, and RL is descended from their daughter, Mary Elizabeth White. And you can see I also have 5 DNA matches from the brother, William H. White. So these are all siblings of my second great-grandmother, Lucinda. I can see that how I'm related to RL, and I don't really disbelieve this tree. If I did, I could do a little reconnaissance and looking online to see if I can verify what RL has said in her tree. So again, I can create create a group now. I'm going to call it the James White Tacy Smith group because those are the common connecting ancestors between me and RL. I can assign a color. I can assign orange. I can add RL to the group down here where I have the blue check mark at the very bottom on the right. And again, in my notes, RL is using the name Barely Home. Her mother's private. Her mother is Ethelene Pearl Daniels. Her mother's Sally Bursby. Her mother's Mary Elizabeth White, and so forth. So I've added in a bunch of information here, which I will save then in the notes field. So you can continue doing this, going through your matches and placing the ones that you can identify into groups. It's good practice for you. You want to add those notes and make sure that you do have all the connections between you and that match so you can recreate the connection without having to redo all the work again. And skip the matches that you cannot identify for now. So we're basically just picking the low-hanging fruit off of your match list at this point. And this is how you get your feet wet with working with your matches and identifying them and sorting them into groups. So we can do the same thing at the other 3 companies. This is going to be a little short tutorial at MyHeritage. Again, we have the same beginner steps. You want to familiarize yourself with the DNA match page at MyHeritage. Familiarize yourself with the individual match page. Learn about how MyHeritage handles estimated relationships. Identify your known matches and sort them into groups. So this is what a MyHeritage match page will look like. It's kind of busy. It has a lot of things going on, but you can see that the same general idea as the Ancestry match page, where it says I have 15,000 DNA matches. They are in order from closest in relation to me to most distant in relation to me. So the first one that we have there is MJ, and she is a close relative of mine. You can see that under estimated relationship is there. It says grandmother, half sister, or aunt. And then over next to that, it tells us how many centimorgans that MJ and I share. And then to the far right is review DNA match, is where I can go to view my individual match with MJ. There are filters and sorting and searching, and those buttons are up on top there, kind of over to the right, if you can see those. There are also DNA tools that you want to take advantage of as well. Again, you want to get in here and start playing around with all these buttons and just investigate what they all do. So when we look at MJ, you can see that there's a little question mark right by the grandmother, half sister, and aunt. And if you click on that right by the red arrow, it opens up this new screen where it does give you more information. It kind of shows you a diagram of how you might be related to that match. And they're predicting that this person is my aunt or niece, my half sister, my grandmother, or my granddaughter. And we can rule a number of these out because we can see MJ's age there and she's 90 or above. And so she can't be my granddaughter, for instance. She cannot be my half sister and she cannot be my niece. But the fact remains, MyHeritage doesn't know how we're related. And so it's up to me to try to figure out which of those possible relationships it might be. Here is another match. This is a match between me and SN. And so this is the individual match page. And again, the individual match page is quite busy. So I have just excerpt parts of it here for you. You can see over on the left is me, on the right is SN. This is the purple contact button. This is how I would send a message to SN if I wanted to contact her. If I want to view her tree, there's a tiny little thing right here that says view tree. I can also scroll down the page and see her tree sometimes. And you can see it, they're calling it a pedigree chart there. I can see some ancestral surnames for SN and me. So on the right-hand side are SN surnames, and the left-hand side are mine. MyHeritage is the other company that will give you tree hints. And at MyHeritage, they are called theory of relativity. And so this is taking my tree and the matches tree, and it's comparing them and saying, we found out that you both have the same name in your tree. So maybe this hint will help you. It's basically what they're trying to tell you. This is match SK, and here is what it looks like when you have a theory of family relativity. You can see down here underneath the match's name, it says SK, we think SK is your third cousin according to the theory of family relativity. Then it says view theory. So I have to click on view theory. And when I go there, it comes up with this diagram showing my tree and SK's tree. So again, it's a little busy, but my tree is over on the left and SK's tree is on the right. And so you can see SK's coming up here, SK to her dad, to Helen Marie Lepper, to Ellis Lepper, to John Lepper and Nancy Allen. And they're saying that John Lepper and Nancy Allen are a common ancestor couple. And I descend from their son, John Lepper III, and they come from Ellis Lepper, I think is what it's saying. Basically, we have this shared ancestor couple of John Lepper II and Nancy Allen. I go over this way with their son, John Lepper Jr., and they come from the son, Ellis Lepper. So if I were going to add this SK to a group, I would call the group John Lepper and Nancy Allen. That's the shared ancestor couple. And so on MyHeritage, the way that you do this is from the match page. You can see over here on the very left by the match's name and picture, there is a box. This is where you would add a group, but this little thing down here is where you would add a note. So the purple thing at the very bottom is where you would add the note. So I'm going to go in here and again, add a note saying exactly who SK is. So I can remember this, and then I'll save it. And this will be on my MyHeritage account. At MyHeritage, they call groups labels. So you click on the box up here to add a label. And then it says manage labels. And then you say create new label. And remember, we're going to name this label John Lepper and Hannah Allen because that's the connecting ancestor couple between me and SK. I can pick a color. I can then add SK to that group with a little checkbox, John Lepper and Hannah Allen, and apply. So that's how you do the same thing at MyHeritage. 23andMe. So we have the same beginner steps where you want to familiarize yourself with your DNA matches and your individual match page. So this is what your match page looks like at 23andMe. And again, you have a list of matches, and it tells us that I have 1,500 of them. There are filters over on the side. I'm not showing them, but they do have filters and they have sort. But basically there's the name and then there's an estimated relationship. And this is 23andMe. So again, click on all the different options and make yourself aware of what all these different buttons do. Now, if I clicked on the match DR, we can see that 23andMe is predicting that he is my second cousin. Below, down over here, it gives me a whole explanation and a diagram, and it shows me how a person could be my second cousin. But then they do say that it's a predicted relationship and that you could also be from a different generation, removed cousins, or share only one ancestor, half cousins. So they basically say, we think you're a second cousin, but then in the fine print, they say, or it could be something else. And again, you want to be really cautious with these predicted relationships. They are not always accurate. You have to do the legwork to figure out how this person is related to you. So this is my match page between me and DR. You can see that I have his birth year here. I have his location, Carmel, Indiana, which tells me he's up by Indianapolis, which is where a certain section of my family lives. So I kind of have an idea from this what side of the family this guy is from. And here's where I would message him. Also at 23andMe, you get a list of places and surnames. And sometimes the match will have filled this in, and other times they will not have. So in this case, DR did fill some of this in, and he's put in that his surnames include Allen, Lang, Badgerow, Ryan, Schofield. So I recognize, of course, that he has the name Allen on his list there. And that was where I thought he probably fell on my tree, because a lot of my Allens do live up in the Indianapolis area. Now, the other thing that 23andMe will do is give you a tree. And this is basically a speculative tree. So it's been created through AI. And this basically means that 23andMe's computers have constructed this tree and have placed your matches on the tree in a way that made sense to the computer. Now, that means that no human being created this tree. No human being with an actual brain created this tree and said, oh, okay, this person is on Sarah's dad's side. Oh, this person's on Sarah's mom's side. Nothing like that happened. So it's completely computer generated, and it can be wrong. I've seen them be spectacularly wrong. So they're trying to group your matches onto different sides of your family. And then they're trying to group them to your grandparents if they can. And sometimes the computer gets it right and sometimes they don't. So this is a speculative tree that you can certainly use as a starting point, but I wouldn't take it as the gospel truth, and just know that it could be wrong because it is computer generated. Some of the drawbacks to 23andMe, there are very few, if any, family trees on this site that a user would have uploaded. So you can't really upload your tree to 23andMe. There's no way to create groups of matches like we did at Ancestry and MyHeritage. We have that AI created tree that kind of leads people astray sometimes. And if you want to start grouping your matches and keeping track of who they are at 23andMe, you're going to have to do it by using a spreadsheet or a chart on a word processing program, or you're going to have to keep paper notes. So that is kind of a disappointment, but 23andMe still has a lot of great matches on there. A lot of people, they have a lot of unique matches that haven't tested at any of the other testing companies. And so you do want to give 23andMe a look, but it's harder to work with than some of the other companies. All right, Family Tree DNA, we're in the home stretch here. Family Finder test. This is their autosomal test. And again, we have the same beginner steps. I just want to tell you that you should really familiarize yourself with what this page is showing you. So this is your Family Finder matches. This is also quite a busy page. There's a lot going on in this page. But basically, you've got your matches over here. These are their names, LR, JW, BG. They are showing you little diagrams of male or female. So you can see LR is female. She's got longer hair. And then JW has a short, like crew cut kind of haircut, indicating that this is a male match. Estimated relationship is right here. The amount of shared DNA is right here. And if they have a tree, it is over here. So this squiggly little thing here on the right is where you can see whether your match has a tree. You can see the top two matches. That squiggly thing is colored in. That means those people do have trees. This person down here, it's not colored in, so this person, BG, does not have a tree. And again, this is the notes icon here on the very right, and you can see I have not written a note for JW or BG, but I have entered a note for LR. Again, you're going to want to hit on all of these items and see what they do. See, there's some filters, there's a search button, there's a sort by, there's all kinds of different options that you can utilize on this match page. Again, at FamilyTreeDNA, you're going to have to use the DNA Painter site a lot because they don't give you a lot of explanation of what the centimorgans shared might be between you and a match, what kind of relationship that could be. LR has entered some ancestral surnames. I can go through that list of ancestral surnames. They're right here. When I hit on LR's name, I get, this is where the notes, this is one place where the notes are. Oops. And I also get their email address under profile. So this is where I could email LR and try to collaborate with them, share information, and so forth. As I mentioned before, LR does have a tree. So when I click on that, I do get a big tree here showing LR, her dad and her mom. And I am related through LR's dad. Up here, there's James White and Tacey Smith, who are on my third great grandparents. So basically, LR and I are both descended through that couple. And so that is what I'm going to put in the notes field. And so again, I can put in the notes field exactly what the tree showed me about how I'm related to me and LR. And then I would save this note. So I would have that. Again, with FamilyTreeDNA, there's fewer family trees on this site. There are some. Users can add their family tree. There's no way to create a group of matches like we talked about at Ancestry and MyHeritage. So you'd have to do, again, a spreadsheet or a word processing program to make notes about who all your matches are and how you're related to them. Or you could keep paper notes on paper and pen, which some people like to do. Now, here's a tidbit for you about FamilyTreeDNA. If you do have your DNA with them in the Family Finder, they are doing a upgrade and a partnership with MyHeritage. And they are wanting you to link to a tree at MyHeritage. And you should have gotten an email from FamilyTreeDNA about this with detailed instructions. You can also see Roberta Estes. She has a blog that's called DNA Explained. She has posted detailed instructions about this as well. But basically, this tree here that we see, this is a FamilyTreeDNA tree that LR has. And this is a tree that's on the account here at FamilyTreeDNA. They are phasing this out, and they are going to have a different button that basically says link to MyHeritage. And you're going to be able to do that with a free account at MyHeritage. So they're basically just wanting you to create a tree over at MyHeritage, and they will have it linking to your FamilyTreeDNA account because they want to phase out having their own family tree capabilities here for whatever reason. So just read the email from FamilyTreeDNA about that. Okay. So that is our overview of starting to work with your matches at the DNA testing companies. And like I said, it was very basic. It was very beginner, just kind of getting your feet wet. And there's a lot more to be done and a lot more to learn about this topic. But of course, we need about 4 hours to cover that, and we don't have that. So today was just our first getting our feet wet. And so I'm going to stop my share and see if we have any questions. So we do have some questions. We have a question from someone named Taurine, who says, regarding ancestry, I have color-coded some based on familial surnames. Because I've used so many colors, it's difficult for me to keep track of which color goes with which surname. Is there any way to generate a key that shows what color I have associated with which surname? I don't think so. I think you would have to kind of, you could go into the group function at Ancestry and you could probably copy and paste the groups that you've already created and then print that out and then refer to it like a cheat sheet. That's probably what I would do. But I'm kind of old school. There might be a better way of doing that. But that's what comes to mind with me, is that I would just go into that list of groups that you have created and print it out on a piece of paper and refer to it that way. But yeah, there's different ways of doing that. Now there's also a update that's going to happen with AncestryDNA. We have been, they told us at Roots Tech in February that they were going to add more colors to our choices. So right now, Ancestry gives you a choice of making 24 groups with different colors, color-coded groups. And we were told at Roots Tech that they are going to expand that to 64, I believe. We don't know when that's going to happen. So they told us about this in February. It's now July. So we are hoping and anticipating that it will come out by the end of this year. But it will probably be part of Ancestry Pro tools. Now, this is also a new development. Ancestry has recently started charging for some advanced DNA features and tree features, and they're calling it Ancestry Pro Tools, and it's an additional fee every month. Now, as somebody who works with DNA a lot, and I want to be able to use all the advanced features, I am paying for it. And I'm happy to use those advanced features. But, you know, it is an extra fee every month. So it may not be for you, but you could do it for 1 month and experiment with it and see whether the Pro Tools is something that you want to subscribe to or not. Emily says, is DNA testing popular in other countries? If most of my relatives were from another country, but I know, okay. Would I have significantly less matches due to unknown information? Yes. Emily, you don't say what country you're talking about. Certainly, European countries are doing DNA testing. European countries and people in the US and Canada and maybe Mexico to a degree. People from other continents, Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe even, are not doing DNA testing in very high numbers at all. South America, it's kind of maybe some of them are, some of them aren't. So yes, if your people are from one of those low testing countries, then you will have significantly fewer DNA matches. I've heard of people who have like their father was a foreign exchange student from China who came to this country, went to college, and then went back to China. And they have very, very few Chinese matches. That is definitely a thing. So yes. Juliana says, why do I have matches with my great-grandmother's DNA and have common ancestors highlighted, but I know my great-grandma was taken in the 1870s by her parents that raised her? Well, you know what, Juliana, I'm not quite sure I follow your question, but it seems like it's more complex and complicated. And so you might want to send us an email and explain it in an email, and I will answer your email and get back to you. Why do these companies never seem to realize someone could be a twin and then the possible relationships are not going to be correct? Well, Pam, actually, if you're talking about yourself, so if the person who takes the DNA test is an identical twin, and then your identical twin also takes the DNA test, the two of you, the DNA company is smart enough to figure out that the two of you are identical twins, and it will mark you as such. It will say self twin, and that would indicate that it did notice that you and your twin had tested and you were identical and so forth. Of course, fraternal twins are not identical, and so it really has no bearing on their DNA, but it's the identical twins. Now, if you're talking about that your grandfather was an identical twin and then his brother was his identical twin and neither one of them have tested because they're both deceased, yeah, you would have to kind of take that into account when you're looking at the matches to the descendants of your grandfather's identical twin. But if I'm not understanding your question well, Pam, be sure to email us also, and I can try to send you a personalized answer as well. Stephen says, can you talk about through lines at Ancestry? Well, I kind of alluded to through lines. Through lines are kind of like the common ancestor hints, where basically they're built off of trees. They're looking at your tree and your match's tree, and they're making connections and saying that you both have the same person in your tree, or it appears that you have the same person in your tree. Now, it's much more likely if the person has a real unusual name. Now, it can get tripped up with people named John Smith. So I got a John Smith in my tree, you got a John Smith in your tree. Maybe they have similar birth dates, but they're not exactly the same. Could that trip up through lines? Maybe. Through lines is also AI generated, meaning that the computers are generating those trees, are generating the through lines. The computers are looking at the trees and trying to match ancestors. So you do want to look at it with a grain of salt. I use through lines a lot with my known relatives because it just organizes known relatives for me under the correct connecting ancestor couple. Where I don't know if through lines is suggesting a possible relationship to somebody that I've never heard of and I don't think it's the right ancestor, I'm very cautious with through lines. So you do have to be cautious with the way you use through lines. I could do a whole session on through lines. I haven't done so before, but I would suggest you read up on it a lot if you have questions about through lines, because there definitely are a lot of different pros and cons of through lines. Dixie says, what companies readily allow you to share your DNA? Such as, is there a way to, in a usable way, download your DNA findings to your family tree maker or such? Ooh, good question, Dixie. Well, one way that you can share your DNA is to upload it to GEDmatch. And I don't know if you're familiar with GEDmatch. If not, you'll want to Google that and research that a little bit before you do the uploading, because there are definitely pros and cons to uploading to GEDmatch. But GEDmatch is a place where you could upload your DNA and you could then match with people at GEDmatch who have also uploaded a DNA. One of the cons of using, well, one of the concerns with using GEDmatch is that it is an open source kind of third-party database. It may not be as secure as the DNA websites are. And also law enforcement uses GEDmatch to solve crimes. So they are uploading criminal DNA into GEDmatch and they're comparing it to the other profiles in GEDmatch, trying to get matches. And this would be criminals, only very violent criminals. It'd be either murderers or rapists. And they're solving crimes this way. This is how the Golden State Killer case was solved, and various other cases that have been recently solved using genetic genealogy. So those are some cons with using GEDmatch, but there's a number of other things that you could possibly do, Dixie. I would say send me an email about that and I'll try to think of some more things to tell you as well. I'm not able to think of more off the top of my head, but if you did send us an email, I would try to send you a better answer for Dixie. But that was a good question, Dixie. Thanks. All right. I think that might be the end of our questions, Kate.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for presenting, and thank you to everybody for attending. Again, our email is genealogy@acpl.info if you have any questions that pop up after the program, or if you would like a copy of the chat, please send us an email and we'll get that to you. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.